And good morning. It's your host, Greg Meriweather. Welcome to No Apologies, Please. Man, we've got an exciting show lined up today. I'm excited for this guest. He's a guy that I talk to often. Uh, in Indianapolis, we've had our host of prosecutors, some in which we used to be terrified of some. I remember back in the day when Stephen Goldsmith used to be the prosecutor, man, and it was like the wildest thing ever. Everybody was so concerned because of child support back in the day, and everybody would be like, you don't want to get in front of Goldsmith. And so, it's just wild because this guy, I think he's really done an excellent job of getting himself involved with the community, putting in some provisions, some things that I believe are good for the community. He shows up. I love the fact that he's a guy. He went to Cardinal Ritter. I'm going to show you guys really quickly. I'm going to show you his bio because I think it's worthy of sharing as we introduce him. Here we go. So we've got him right here. Let's slide down. So Ryan Mears, Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears brings vast experience to the office and a balanced approach to criminal justice. Prosecutor Mears has championed reform and set new expectations for the criminal justice system in Marion County. After completing law school, he immediately began his career in public service at the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. During his 17 years as a deputy prosecutor, he has tried more than 100 jury and bench trials. Most recently, he served as the office's chief trial deputy prior to becoming prosecutor. A native of Indianapolis, Ryan attended Cardinal Ritter High School and played college basketball at St. Joseph College in Rensselaer, Indiana. He graduated magna cum laude from the Indiana University McKinney School of Law. So, man, without further ado, let us bring him on board. Welcome to the show, my friend Ryan Mears. How's it going, brother?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here with you, and thanks for having me on.
Man, it's good to have you on. It's we talk a lot, so I'm just excited because when it's all said and done, I want the people to, really know what's going on in the city. I know that, we face a lot of challenges in Indianapolis, but I want us to definitely, expound on a lot of the things that you have going on. We just recently, I'm not even going to go there yet. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the group.
Well, first of all, it's great to see everybody. My name is Ryan Mears. I'm the Marion County Prosecutor from Indianapolis. Love the city of Indianapolis. And really, the reason I got into public service is I wanted to make a difference in my community. And I never had any aspirations or any thoughts that I'd ever be in a political position. I went into public service because I always thought about my parents. My mom was a school teacher. She loved her job. My dad worked in insurance and he had a job. He didn't love it. And so I wanted that feeling of looking forward to going to work every single day, which is why I went into public service and started in the prosecutor's office, worked under Carl Brizzi, who was a Republican. And through a lot of different twists of fates and luck, here I am as the Marion County Prosecutor. And I always said to myself, if you're in a position like this, you need to try to do as much good as possible and try to, help as many people as possible, which is what we try to do.
Awesome. I love it, man. So, yeah, I didn't know you were under Carl Brizzi. He passed away, right?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, I saw that. And then I used to see you all the time with, he passed away too, Terry Curry.
Terry Curry, yeah.
Wow, man, it's crazy. And so, back then, when I used to see you with Terry Curry, I think you pretty much emerged, came on the scene after that, and you initially probably kind of walked in right after the Aaron Bailey trial. Right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think one of the first times we met was you were with IMPD or doing something with IMPD. We're at a community meeting. I remember some of the things that you said, and I went up to you afterwards and said, I appreciated your perspective and willingness to say what you said.
Yeah.
Because I knew at that time there was a lot more that I wanted to say about situations, but I wasn't the guy. And you said what I think a lot of people were thinking in that meeting. And so I remember coming up to you saying, hey, I appreciate your willingness to voice that.
It's funny. I'm glad that you said that, because a lot of people, man, when they look, they see this. They see me on the microphone. They see me on lives. They don't necessarily get to see the fact that I say the same things in the room. It's like if I'm
Right.
in the room, I'm a person that does not hold back. I'm going to say what I believe the community is saying, because I believe that if we don't say it, how do you fix it if it's not said? And that's just what I feel. Thinking back to that case, I really want you to touch on this, because I want us, we've had a lot of police action shootings. And I want you to just kind of explain to the people what that looks like from your perspective in the Marion County Prosecutor's Office.
Well, I think the first thing we need to start with, there's too many.
That's true.
We just see far too many of these situations, and so I think there's two different tracks here. Like systematically, what is going on that we see so many of these things occurring, and then individually, what's the proper way to address these situations. Right now we're involved in a lot of conversations with a lot of different entities in terms of what should these investigations look like, who should be responsible for these investigations, and what role should someone outside or independent of the prosecutor's office and law enforcement, what role should they play in those investigations? One of the things that we have started to do here is, we have relied on experts who are outside of the state of Indiana to help us walk through this process in terms of, are these shootings appropriate or not? And one of the reasons we did that is because when I talk to people in the community, there was a lot of conversation about, okay, well, you're relying on basically people who work with these officers to clear the shootings, and the community had a real problem with that. And so one of the things I think that we've made probably the biggest change is we now retain outside experts who have no connection to anybody here. Sometimes they have a legal background, sometimes they have a law enforcement background, to help us walk through that process and say, these are the guideposts, these are the things that you should be looking at, this is what the general order says, this is how the general order should apply, and really try to get an outside perspective on what all of that means. But in many respects, officer-involved shootings are not complicated in the sense that the standard is just, was it reasonable or not? And you can do a bunch of different things and put a bunch of different things out there, but at the end of the day, the law is very clear. It just says, was the officer's conduct reasonable or not? But what we want to do is, how can we develop enough information to help inform people's judgment and understanding of what does reasonable mean under the circumstances?
Yeah. I love it. One of the things when I remember going back to the Aaron Bailey ordeal, and no one really understood who could do what. Right. It was, people were like, well, why can't the police chief just fire the officers? They didn't realize, that was one of the points that I really tried to push through to the community. And the mayor ended up pushing like train the trainer, because I was like, in order to, because I'll tell you, our community looks at the news, they hear what happened, and then they run into the streets and say, you know what, let's protest or whatever, have a rally. And I'm like, no, let's figure out what's going on. Let's address the right people, because we didn't think about the merit board or the use of force people, or, the chief can only make a recommendation to fire the officer, so on and so forth. And so it's like, I think that Indianapolis, just by way of having the right people in the room, we're able to now navigate a little differently when police action shootings take place, because I think we're a better educated community than most. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I think we're better educated, but there's still a lot of holes in that process. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things when the chief hires someone to serve as his legal counsel, what skill set is he looking for? Is he looking for someone who's good at contracts? Is he looking for someone who's good at the budget? But ultimately, one of the most important things that they are going to have is they're going to be responsible for moving forward with termination of an officer. And they're going to be the people who are in the courtroom litigating that fact, saying the chief wants to fire this person. And that person has to be a really talented attorney, a trial attorney. Sure. Because as we all know, the FOP is going to spare no expenses in defending those individuals. And so who is ultimately going to be standing there in the courtroom representing the interests of the chief? And I think in the Aaron Bailey case, I'm not sure that the chief had necessarily the best representation or individuals who were there to carry out the chief's wishes. And sure. As a result, they got an outcome that was adverse to the chief. And so I think that's something we also have to focus on is who's going to be the person, if the chief makes the recommendation, hey, this person needs to be terminated, who's going to be the person to carry that out and litigate that point in front of the merit board?
Sure.
Because as you know, too oftentimes the chief loses that argument. And the reason the chief loses that argument is because the other side, that's all they do. That's the only thing they do is try to justify and rationalize bad behavior by police officers.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I hope everybody's paying attention to in this process. And I think the Aaron Bailey case is a good reminder of, you got the recommendation from the chief that I think the community wanted and appreciated. You move forward with the administrative process, and the chief lost.
Yeah.
And was that because he was surrounded by the people who were in a position to help him, carry out what he was trying to achieve?
Yeah. I've seen a lot of different cases. I mean, I would definitely not want to be in your shoes, because we've got a lot on the line. We've got a lot of cases out there that the community is looking at. I mean, like beaming on right now, due to, I don't know how many did we have 18. Last year? 18. But we had 18 police action shootings. And I know some of them, I've sat on the calls, and some of them I'm like, I would not want to be in your shoes. I'm just going to say that. The other thing is, when you think about these police action shootings, just from your perspective, what has permitless carry done in this city, in your opinion?
Well, it's made law enforcement's job 50 times harder. And what I think the community is adjusting to and law enforcement is adjusting to is that in almost every single one of these encounters, the person that they are encountering has a firearm, and there's not a lot law enforcement can do about that. That's not evidence of anything, because everybody's allowed to walk around with a gun. And so when we get into these questions of what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, what role should the firearm or the presence of a firearm play into that analysis, is something that I think everybody's trying to figure out. A couple of years ago, it was really clear cut. Hey, you can't have a gun. And because you can't have a gun, that's evidence of a crime. And now the police are in a totally different framework in terms of what they're permitted to do, as opposed to now it's like, oh, you have a gun. Well, that's not really a crime. Law enforcement can't do much about that. And I think that's where all of us are struggling. And I don't think, the training didn't change overnight. It's not like the training changed overnight and then we had 18 shootings. I think those 18 shootings are a reflection of the fact that law enforcement is encountering more people who are armed.
Yeah.
And how are those confrontations or how are those interactions going to go so nobody ends up getting hurt? And that's a real point, a pressure point right now for law enforcement in the community, because people have a right to carry those firearms. There's nothing illegal about it, but cops don't like encountering people who have guns.
Yeah.
And it puts them on edge, and it heightens the tension between those interactions. And too oftentimes we're seeing some level of force being used or applied that ultimately probably doesn't benefit the community.
When you look at, I'm with you on the permitless carry. I think that people are, I would assume as just a civilian that everybody has a gun. I mean, I would, and I can understand how IMPD would assume the same thing, even though they say they don't. I've had those conversations. I'm like, are you guys assuming that everyone has a firearm? They're not. Absolutely not. I think the number reflects and says that someone believes it somewhere, because at the end of the day, it's their every day they get up to do that job. They want to go home. I would too. And so the permitless carry, I believe, has just done a shift in total mindset, not just with IMPD, but with the community at large. Do you see do you think that there will be any type of provisions or anything that changes to help alleviate what we're seeing now based on permitless carry?
You would like to think so. I mean, if you look at I think we had 16 homicides in January. 7 of those were being evaluated for self-defense, meaning were they going to be cleared as self-defense? And I think in most of those situations, both parties were armed. We're seeing a lot of people lose their life in simple confrontations. And the fact pattern is all too familiar. I got into an argument with Greg. I looked at Greg. I saw he had a gun. I thought he was reaching. If I didn't pull first, I was going to get shot. That plays out far too often in our city. And we're seeing a lot of people lose their life over these simple, petty arguments because there's a fear that if I don't do something, I'm going to be the one who ends up getting shot.
Yeah.
And that to me is the game changer. Is I feel like there's a lot of innocent, good people that who are dead because of permitless carry.
Yeah.
And I don't see any, the legislature is about to go out of session. They didn't take up one bill to address that issue. But, I think it's frustrating to everybody involved to see such a senseless number of lives being lost. If you look at, we filed a ton of homicide cases last year. 35% of the people that we filed murder charge against, that was their very first criminal offense, meaning they didn't even have a traffic ticket.
Oh, wow.
65% of those individuals never had a crime of violence in their background. So the people that are being charged with murder they have totally different backgrounds than maybe what we had before. And it's a lot of people who are in our community, who are otherwise law-abiding citizens, who get into these confrontations and end up, using a gun. And I think that's the biggest change that we're seeing right now. And there's too many families who are losing loved ones over dumb arguments.
So you said what? 35% have
35 is their first time. Like you look at a criminal history, it's blank.
No criminal history.
You see on there is murder.
Wow, that is disheartening.
It is.
35% of these,
and that doesn't even take into the fact like we're going to clear one of these homicides this week of self-defense that happened in January. Person doesn't have a criminal history, so like that person is not even being charged, but somebody lost their life. That family is devastated, but under the law, the actions of that person were justifiable. And how many of those cases do we have to see before there's a change in the legislature's perspective on that issue?
That's a startling statistic. 35% of these guys have no criminal history, but are now in the system. And the first thing says murder.
Right.
Man. We talked about this and I said, do you think that most of these guys are carrying because they believe they're in the community that is simply violent? Yeah.
And I don't know. Like sometimes you talk to people in the community and there's no question a group of people who carry for protection. Like, hey, there's too many crazy people out here. I'm not going to get caught by someone because there's a lot of crazy people. And then I'll talk to other folks and they have a completely different perspective on it. And I don't want to say they're doing it for fun. Yeah. But it kind of, I think there's a lot of herd mentality with it, or a lot of groupthink, like, well, my friends are doing it, so why am I not doing it?
Sure.
And, because when you drill down and like, okay, well, what's your fear? What's your actual fear? A lot of people don't really articulate anything specific. It's just this general idea. Well, my friends have guns. I know other people carry guns. It just gives me peace of mind.
Sure. A question, Yvette D. Williams asked a question. She said, how is it okay for people to walk around with assault weapons? No need for such violent weapons on the streets. I mean, you see it. What's that about?
Yeah, I mean, to me, like Indiana has a lot of absurd gun laws. The fact that you can walk down to the circle right now with an AR-15 or an AK-47 and the legislature thinks that's perfectly reasonable and a good thing is mind-boggling to me. But that's the law. There is nothing prohibiting anybody from taking an assault rifle and walking around our streets, and there's nothing the police can do about it. There's nothing the prosecutor's office can do about it. It is 100% legal. And there is no regulation of carrying those weapons fully loaded, pretty much anywhere in our state.
Why do you, I mean, if you were to point out the mentality from a legislation perspective, why do you think they think that's okay? Because I mean, when you look at just the mass shootings that happen in the country where it's just this like slaughter of people, it's like, why would anybody in legislation think it's okay to even remotely have that weapon out in the street?
Yeah, and I've never heard a good reason for it. I mean, I think the biggest dichotomy we have here is the people where nobody live make laws for the people where everybody lives. And maybe it's okay to have an AR-15 if you live in a county that has 12,000 people. But when you live in a densely populated area where you want to attract visitors, believe me, they don't want to see people walking around with AR-15s.
Right.
And so I don't understand the legislature's perspective on this. They'll point to the Constitution or something along those lines. I think fundamentally people on the right tend to think, well, if more people have guns, that somehow makes us all safer. And this idea of a good guy with a gun is the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun. Now, we've seen in Uvalde and other situations that's not true.
Yeah.
There's a lot of documented instances where the good guys with the gun didn't do a lot.
Yeah.
So, I think that myth can be dispelled, but that is something that you frequently hear from the right to support, the choices they make with their gun policy.
Yeah. How does a city like Chicago get that type of gun law inside the city? And I don't think it's universal in the state, but I know in the city of Chicago, they got a whole different thing going on with gun laws. How does a city, how can we get there?
The legislature has to give us the power to do it. And, that's something they've been unwilling to do. It's interesting. Republicans typically say we want local control. Local people know best. We don't want the state government or the national government telling us what to do unless it's an issue like guns. And then all of a sudden it's like, nope, we need state policy on this. State law trumps local law. We're not going to let you do it. Yeah. And they've really dug in their heels on that particular topic in terms of significantly limiting the city of Indianapolis's ability to regulate ourselves. The most recent laws that they actually passed, not only did they say you can't do it, but if you try, they attach significant civil penalties to it as well. So it's like, hey, not only are we saying this is not allowed, but if you even try, we're going to hit you with massive fines to make it cost prohibitive to even go down that road. Yeah.
Can you explain stand your ground? I know that, going from permitless carry, we have a stand your ground. I remember that being signed as well, but I don't think people get it. Can you explain stand your ground to the audience?
The biggest thing that is literally written into the law, and we're a stand your ground state, and anytime you go to trial, this jury instruction is read to the jurors, is when you're evaluating a claim of self-defense, it says you have no duty to retreat. You have no duty to retreat. You don't have any duty to do anything to mitigate the situation. So what that means in practice is me as a prosecutor, when I'm evaluating a case, and if we say, well, this person could have walked away, this person could have done something to diffuse the situation, this person could have just left, the law says you cannot consider that and should not consider that in evaluating someone's claim for self-defense. And so what a judge will instruct on, what a prosecutor is supposed to apply to people, is if two people get into a confrontation, you say there's 10 different things you could have done to avoid this fight or this gun battle. We don't get to say that. It's totally based on you have every right to stand wherever you are. And if someone wants to engage in some sort of confrontation with you, you have no duty to retreat. You have no duty to mitigate the situation. And that's the stand your ground law, which seems to incentivize confrontation and people using their guns.
Yep. And I'm so glad that you explained. I'm also glad I asked the question, but I'm so glad you explained that, because I don't think people ever took that, to correlate. Okay, you've got permitless carry and you've got stand your ground all in the same. And it's right. And then you wonder why we've got this thing called 200 homicides every single year in Indianapolis, 600 plus non-fatals since 2019. And when you look at it, it's like we've got some legislation issues to me, because if I don't have to carry, if I don't have to have anything showing no anything, I can carry without a permit, and then I don't have to diffuse any situation where a confrontation is taking place. 9 times out of 10 in this world, somebody's going to get shot.
Yeah, and that's what we see. And the thing that's frustrating to me is you can't even consider it. Like it's not even part of the equation. And the law specifically says there's no duty to do anything other than stand there.
Yeah.
And people, I think, a lot of times misapply it and say, well, it's only if it's at your house. No, you could be walking down the street.
That's right.
And stand your ground applies. You have no duty to retreat. It's not just at your house. It's not just in your front yard. It is wherever you are located. As long as you have the right to be there, you have no duty to do anything.
Yeah, that's sad. Kim Boyd, good morning. She says, Prosecutor Mears, can you also share info on the red flag law?
Sure. So the red flag law just basically allows law enforcement to take firearms from an individual who is going through some sort of mental health crisis or mental health issue. The biggest limitation that it has is it does nothing to prevent that person from gaining access to a firearm in the future. And so, it's really for that person at that specific moment in time with that specific weapon. So law enforcement gets called out to a scene, a guy going through a mental health situation, there's a firearm there, they can take that firearm. If that guy has a different gun, or if he buys a gun online, which happens every single day, there's nothing that allows law enforcement to take that second gun because there's not necessarily that presence of the mental health issue. So it's a good tool in a specific circumstance, but it's limited in its application.
Interesting. Mental health has, really played a big role in a lot of these cases that we've seen with law enforcement. How does that play out in the courtroom? When we look and mental health is on the line, we just had a case. Where a young man, took the life of an officer. And in that case, it said that he was guilty with mental illness. Can you explain what guilty with mental illness means? It says it, but I want us to get in depth with it.
Yeah. So in Indiana, there is insanity, meaning you did not appreciate the wrongfulness of your conduct, and your mental health issue rose to the fact that it basically prevented you from forming the intent to commit a crime. Is what it means. In Indiana, there's another thing called guilty but mentally ill, meaning we recognize that you have a mental illness, and that mental illness impacted your actions, but it did not rise to the level where you could not form an intent. So there's a lot of people in our community who have mental health issues, but they still fundamentally know right from wrong. Mm-hmm. And so what guilty but mentally ill says is you're going to be sentenced in the same way as anybody else would. But as your sentence, you are going to receive mental health treatment. You're going to be diagnosed, and you're going to get the resources needed for somebody with your mental health issues. So it's kind of a middle ground between you have just guilty, and then guilty but mentally ill acknowledges, hey, you have mental health issues. We're going to sentence you the same way, but as part of that sentence, you have to have access to mental health treatment. And then insanity is just your mental health issue rises to the level where you don't even you're unable to form the requisite intent. Okay. And so that's something that doesn't happen a ton, but does happen from time to time.
That definitely brings some understanding to the case that just happened, because the community at large believe that if you're guilty with mental illness, that means you're just going to a mental health facility and there will be no prison time. Is that how that works?
No, if you're convicted of attempt murder and the sentence is 20 to 40 years, if the judge sentences you to 30 years at the Department of Correction, you're going to 30. You have to do that sentence at the Department of Correction. You just get access to the mental health treatment that the DOC is now required to provide. So gotcha. The location there, unfortunately, there's not really any state hospitals anymore. Right. So you are sentenced to the DOC. You go to the DOC, and while you are at the DOC, you should receive a better standard of care and access to more mental health treatment than is otherwise available to individuals who are just found guilty.
Okay, clear on that. We have Paul Gable on here, and he has a question. He says, Prosecutor Mears, how do we adjust bail to keep violent offenders, especially repeat offenders, behind bars? He wants to see, what do we do with bail? How does that work?
Well, it doesn't work.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing. The challenge with bail is this: who do we want to keep behind bars? And people act like the jail has 10,000 beds. It doesn't. It has
Right.
3,500. I think right now in Marion County we have 30,000 criminal cases that are currently pending. So let's start with the proposition: 27,000 people who are accused of crimes are not going to be in the Marion County Jail.
Right.
And so part of this is a basic math problem. I think where we being the criminal justice system, could do ourselves favor is there just needs to be more common sense determinations. When I'm out in the community, people are just like, I don't want the guy with the low level possession charge. I'm not saying he needs to be in jail, but the guy who keeps breaking into my house, he needs to be in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we just need to take a more common sense approach. They're currently revising the bail schedule right now. The judges are, and Chief Bailey and I both provided input to a couple of things that we had concerns on, because we were concerned that it didn't take into consideration acts of violence as much as we believe that it should. We think that if you hurt someone else, if you hurt someone else seriously, if you hurt someone and you use a gun, you should have a much higher bond than someone who breaks into a shed, or someone who is a bad driver and is HTV. Those are fundamentally different crimes that pose fundamentally different threats to the community, and the bond should reflect that. The way it's currently written, that doesn't always happen. So everybody understands the bond process. If Greg is arrested today, when he breaks the threshold of the jail, he will get a bond, and that bond will entirely be based on what charge or what the officer arrested him for. So if the officer arrested him on a misdemeanor, it's an automatic OR. Before it even comes to the prosecutor's office, that person is going to be released. For most level 6 felonies, that person is going to be OR'd, and that person is going to be released before it ever comes to the prosecutor's office. And so part of it is also just how we want to run the system. Like, is that a good thing, that as soon as Greg gets arrested, that he's probably going to get turned loose? I would submit to you that on a lot of cases, yeah, that probably is okay. But on different types of offenses where it impacts other people, not only their business, but people's personal interests, I do think that we can do a better job of considering the impact that someone's actions have on the community as a whole, and the bond needs to reflect that. Sure. But I'll also tell you, like, we got to get away from monetary values on bond. Like, either Greg's a threat or he's not. If Greg's not a threat, then what does it matter if he has $100 bond or $1,000 bond? Like, that doesn't mean anything. That's just an arbitrary number. And so I don't want people in jail who just because they're poor. Yeah. If Greg doesn't have $100 and that's why he's in jail, how does that make our community safer? And what does that say about the criminal justice system? Because it says to me that we have two different systems for people who can pay and people who can't.
Police Browder. Yeah.
So we got to take money out of this equation. If you're a threat and we're concerned about what you might do if you're released, then it doesn't matter if you have $1,000 or $50,000. Those individuals need to remain in custody. Sure. And if we're not concerned for the safety, we shouldn't ask Greg, well, do you have $100? Like, yeah, that doesn't make me safer. If you give the clerk $100, that doesn't make our community. I'm not somehow more safe as someone who lives in this community. Yeah. And so we also have to take out the money part of it, because I think it sends the wrong message to the community.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's when I think about even with the whole child support situation, where when we were taking licenses, and I'm like, well, how the hell is the guy supposed to work if he has a car and can go to work, and you take his license, you just added another barrier to his life to make it just even worse. So I have another question. Oh, Kim Boyd is asking, is the case that I mentioned, is this case going through mental health court? That case didn't go through mental health court, did it? No. So
mental health court is only for misdemeanors and level 6 cases. If you're in a major felony, you are not eligible for mental health courts.
Clear. I hope you got that, Kim. Ryan, you and I talked about youth violence, young people with guns, and there was something that that you brought to my attention that I was not aware of, but the waiving of the youth to adult court. Can you explain that point to me again?
Yeah. So something that I don't think a lot of people realize is in the state of Indiana, you are automatically filed into adult court if you are 16 years old and you have a gun, and in particular, if you have a gun on school property. And by what I mean by that is I have no ability to file it in juvenile court. It is an automatic file into adult court. And so what we're seeing is when kids take guns to school, they are charged as adults, because in Indiana, the process doesn't work where you have a waiver hearing. It's automatic if the kid is 16. And that is a game changer for a lot of kids who are 16, 17 years old, who are going through maybe some different things. They're sent immediately to adult court. And I don't think a lot of people in the community realize or appreciate that. I think a lot of people think for waiver, well, there has to be some sort of hearing where we consider the child's background and what's their mental health and what's their cognitive development. It's not the way it works in Indiana. If you're 16 on most crimes, you're going straight to adult court. And me as the prosecutor, I don't have the discretion to say, actually, we think this is better suited for juvenile court for any number of reasons. We don't get that opportunity once someone hits the age of 16. And so a lot of people talk about, well, once you're 18, it changes. It's actually 16. On a lot of these offenses, once you turn 16, you are only going to adult court, and that's the only option available to the prosecutor's office and the judiciary.
Yeah, and that's on all guns, whether battery, whatever, when anything involved with a gun at 16, you're totally going to be waived and going to adult court.
Yeah. So, I mean, if during a robbery, we see a lot of those cases. Robbery, there's the presence of a gun. That's an automatic file. Certainly, if you ever fire a gun, shoot a gun, it's an automatic file. And then possession of gun in someplace like a school is an automatic file into adult court.
Man, that's wild. When you think about, when you think about just poverty, in a sense, how much? I'll ask you this: how much has it changed? Is robbery going up in Indianapolis from your perspective? Because you're seeing a lot of. We talked about this. You're seeing a lot of different types of robbery. I want you to answer is robbery going up, and then the second part of that question, I want you to talk about just these flash mobs of people going into stores and stealing coats and jewelry and all that, and how that could possibly become RICO.
Yeah, so the robbery cases are actually going down. Like if you look at the incidence of robbery, that number is going down. The retail theft is probably an unreported number. Because too oftentimes retailers don't want the disruption of calling the police and what that looks like in front of their store. So they let a lot of these things go. And as a consequence, theft for a long, long time has been the number one most filed case at the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. We've worked with some retailers, and certainly we've seen that it is underreported in terms of what they're actually presenting to us. One of the things that you talked about, and one of the things that we've had to do a couple of times, is when you see these flash mobs or people coming in and stealing a significant number of items together, and then, everybody knows what they do, then they sell them. Yeah. And so in that case, one of the things that we've done is what people commonly refer to as the RICO Act, or the corrupt business influence, which says that if your business is basically, crime, and it could be anything from murder to theft, we can charge that as an enhanced felony, meaning the theft charge might be a level 6 based on the value, but we can enhance it to a level 5 felony and say, because this is basically your business and how you are supporting yourself, we're going to charge you as corrupt business influence. And, from there, we'll be able to move forward with a more aggressive prosecution where the penalties are a little bit higher. We see this a ton with electronics. It's crazy the lengths people go to steal these items and then sell them. And, we did a walkthrough with Best Buy and kind of went through things. The reason that PlayStation is $500 is not because it costs $500. It's because of all the things Best Buy has to do to protect that PlayStation so people don't sell it. And, we've had people cut holes into ceilings. We've had all sorts of things where people have been very creative to steal these electronic devices. And there needs to be a greater consequence because, number one, it's keeping it out of, people who are trying to do things the right way, or people just trying to go to the store and buy things. But we also need to create a harsh enough penalty to deter people from doing stuff like cutting holes in the side of buildings and, clearing out electronic sections of back rooms of businesses.
Yeah. I'm looking at that. And one of the things that I'm highly challenged by is just creating a mentality where things matter more than you.
Right.
And I'll say this is Greg Meriweather. This has nothing to do with Ryan Mears. This is one of the reasons where I'm not a big fan of toy drives. I'll say this because from my opinion, poor people don't need toys. They need resources. They need, it could be the rent. And I say this all the time. How many times have you given a person a turkey or a ham in the heat or the power didn't work or the oven didn't work? And we don't even think about those things. We just think about the act of the person. Most of the things that we do in this community that we believe are good deeds, we do for to be self-satisfied. We don't necessarily look and say, is this helping the community? And when I look and people can get a Sagamore Award for giving away toys, it sends a message to people that things matter more because you're rewarding a person for doing something, and people's conditions don't change, and you create a mentality from my perspective when you do those types of things. That's just my opinion. So I want to touch on this. I know that you have taken some flack for just the whole marijuana situation. One of the things that I want you to explain is what you've done, and then how that kind of, it creates a situation, in my opinion, because you still may have an arrest record. And can you just kind of explain, how those two things work?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing for me is we in the criminal justice system don't do a great job in a lot of different areas. And one of those areas is the enforcement of certain crimes. And we saw that with marijuana. If you look at marijuana usage rates, and then you across races, and then you look, well, who's actually arrested and charged with possession of marijuana? You would not think any white people use marijuana. And
right.
I can tell you that is not true. Sure. And so when we see these sorts of disparities, we've got to do something about it. And we can't say, well, we're going to have a commission, we'll have a meeting, we'll talk about it. It's clear as day. Marijuana usage rate with white people is higher than it is with African Americans. Yet when you look at who's ultimately ends up in the criminal justice system, it's African Americans. It's undisputed. Sure. So when we see those things, we have to do something, and we did. And we made the decision not to prosecute simple possession of marijuana because I wanted to send a clear message to the community that we want to be fair to people. And the Constitution is a great thing. And one of the most important things it says in the Constitution is the law must apply equally to everyone. And when we see that the law does not apply equally to everyone, we have to do something about it. So we made that decision. To me, it has been a benefit, number one, to our relationship in the community, because people say, hey, you're not trying to jam me up for that joint. And so I think it helps build trust in our community, which we're grateful for. The other part of it, though, is it also sends a clear message about our priorities. I'm really concerned about violent crime. I'm really concerned about murders. And if everything's a priority, then nothing is a priority. And I want to win those murder cases. And I'm not going to take away the resources of this office and the prosecutors that we have to waste their time on a dime bag of marijuana when we have a significant number of unsolved homicide cases and unsolved non-fatal shooting cases. We have 200 pending homicide cases right now. That's where those people need to be working. And that's where that energy and effort needs to be dedicated to. And as a consequence, we win 92% of our murder cases. And we do that because that's what our focus is. And this, everything that I just said mentions nothing of the fact that I'm literally saving the county hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sure. Because every time someone gets arrested for that, or every time someone gets charged with that, you have the costs to the court, to the jail, to the public defender, to the prosecutor, and the crime lab. People forget this. Like, we actually have to have a scientist test it and say, yes, that's in fact marijuana.
Sure.
It costs,
Hundreds
conservatively
of thousands of dollars.
$10,000 to prosecute someone for a dime bag of weed.
Wow.
So if we're getting less than 0.001% return on our investment, what are we doing? And so it doesn't make sense financially. It doesn't make sense from a justice perspective. And it's something that we probably need to do more of in our community, is evaluating these discrepancies and getting everybody on board to say, why is this? And this is how we're going to fix it.
I agree wholeheartedly. I just wish that, because you still get the arrest record, because IMPD is still going to arrest an individual, correct?
Yeah, they've done a better job, like in terms of the number. I think when I initially did the policy, I think they arrested a lot of people.
Yeah, they were mad.
Yeah, they were angry. That number's gone down every year because it's kind of a hassle to arrest people. And let's be honest, the biggest issue is the sheriff doesn't pick them up anymore. Yeah. So they're kind of responsible for it on their own. And so when that's their responsibility, is that how they really want to spend their time on a dime bag of marijuana? I think most people, the answer is no.
Dr. Preston Adams, what's up? Welcome to the show. I'm glad you're on here. He has a question. He says, how often has the RICO statute been invoked in cases like those?
I couldn't give you a definitive number. I mean, it has been more, I think probably more often than what people realize.
Yeah.
There's a kid, like, we had a situation where people were just running into Victoria's Secret because they had like the table set out right there and just grabbing everything. And we charged those individuals under the Corrupt Business Influence Act. We had a situation where people were running into Dick's. Dick's had like a kind of a vulnerable part in their store where they could grab a bunch of coats and get in and out of there really quickly, and we charged individuals under that. So it happens. Is it, what percentage? I couldn't tell you, but I think it's probably more than what people realize.
Yeah, it just, when we talked about it, it was clear to me. I was like, man, this is eventually going to be a RICO case, because it's organized crime at that point. You got people walking in with masks, gloves, hammers. I mean,
bags, like they're putting in bags.
Yeah. It's like totally. It looks like what was that movie, Heat? It looks like Heat when you see people, but now they're doing it in clothing stores and jewelry stores, which is really, really wild. I think that, and when I think about this, and I'll say this, knock on wood, but like Saks Fifth Avenue, it's like they're lucky they're in this space, because it's such a congested area that it would be so hard to just go in there and do that and get away, because 82nd Street is so congested that they'd be stuck in traffic. So good. Don't look forward to 82nd Street getting any wider anytime soon, because it helps stop the madness with that. Man, I want to ask you, I see a lot of politicians, I see the FOP, a lot of people, look and they get mad at Ryan Mears. And I just saw, I'll say his name. I just saw Shreve's ad, or his campaign commercial, and he was, wanting to go after people who he believes are letting people back out on the streets, so on and so forth. What does it mean to you when you see those things? Why is Ryan Mears deemed the bad guy from a lot of political perspectives?
Well, it's always easier to blame someone else than try to solve problems. And, I think it's an easy narrative. It's the prosecutor's fault. And there are people in this community in particular who are in law enforcement who want to amplify that narrative. Then actually, kind of roll up their sleeves and say, hey, how can we solve and deal with these issues? And it's just pandering. And it's always funny when I hear people say those sorts of things, because it's like, well, one of the biggest challenges we have right now in our community is housing and access to housing. And you won't talk about that. You won't put any energy and effort into solving that. But you're perfectly comfortable just getting up there talking trash about me, when if I leave, we're still going to have the same housing crisis.
Sure.
And the fact that people are not housed has more of an impact on crime than anything that I could ever say or do.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's disingenuous. And I think the other thing too is when I'm out in the community talking to people in the community don't buy it.
Right.
It might be a good talking point in a Republican primary and, some part of the state. But most people, when they think about it or have an honest conversation about it, they don't really have anything. And, when I ask people, okay, what do you want me to do differently? It's usually like, well, keep everybody in jail. It's like, okay, well, I'm not the judge, but bring that up to the judge if that's that's your perspective. And so I don't get too caught up in it. It probably tells me I'm doing something right because most of the people who criticize me, I think, are deplorable people. So I'm usually okay with it. I usually don't want to be standing on the same side of the street of those guys, anyways.
Yeah, that's tough. So Des Tinsley has a question, but I'm not gonna let Ryan answer that because I don't want him to be put in a position of where he's looking like a lawmaker. And so we'll talk about that offline. Let's look at expungement and where we're going with that. What's the plan? What's the play? What are we doing at the Marion County Prosecutor's Office as it relates to people getting expunged?
That's really one of the things that I think we can do to have the biggest impact in our community is try to help people move past their criminal history. And, it used to be when I talked to people about expungements, it was usually about jobs. Hey, I can't get a job or I can't move past kind of this entry level position because of my criminal history. That conversation has evolved into I can't rent. No one will rent to me. I can't get financing because of the felonies in my background. And, I mentioned the housing crisis that we had earlier. The housing discrimination that exists with people who have prior felony convictions is just unheard of in this state. And if you have a prior felony conviction, good luck renting because most places just flat out won't rent to you.
That's right.
And so that to me, our community is not better off if those individuals are on the street. And so we spend a lot of energy and effort to help people get those criminal convictions removed. Indiana has a great expungement law that gives the prosecutor wide latitude to give expungements. The challenge is it's a complicated law and access to justice is a real issue. And so we were in Center Township last week at the Center Township Trustee's office doing one of our second chance events where we partnered up with the law school and the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic to help people get expungements and get their driver's license back because it is a huge barrier to people, not only on the employment side, but on the housing side.
Sure.
And I tell people this all the time, but I mean, the people ask me, well, what does it take to break the cycle of recidivism? It takes a job and a house. People have some place to live. And if they got someplace to work, chances are we're not going to see them in the criminal justice system. When they don't have that stable housing, when they don't have stable employment, that's when we see them come back into the criminal justice system. And too often times we are holding people's past against them in a way where it's just really difficult for them to move forward. And so that's why we spend so much time and effort on it, is because ultimately I think that helps break the cycle and helps get people into housing.
Yeah, time served, it's an unfortunate fact that time served is not time served. It's a lifetime sentence. And I really, wish that there was something that we could do in this country to change that narrative because, when people come home and want to, try to change their lives, it's unfortunate that, they carry that flag on them forever. I got Anthony Hampton on here. Good morning, my brother. He says, can the prosecutor file charges against the low-income housing apartment slumlords? The city has sold a lot of the properties to out-of-town owners. The complexes have several abandoned apartments, and they're some of the most dangerous and violent locations in the city. Good morning.
100%. And I think you're going to see that. I think one of the things that has happened is a lot of these housing a lot of these housing locations are behind what people don't necessarily realize is they're owned by a nonprofit, which is owned by an LLC, which is owned by another nonprofit. And so trying to trace back who the actual slumlord owner is a little bit more difficult and challenging. But to answer your question, I think you're going to see some prosecutions here pretty soon involving that very issue because these are national companies, by the way. These
Sure.
are not like mom and pop shops. These are national companies whose business model is to exploit poor people.
Poor people.
And we need to make sure that we are being aggressive with those individuals. So yes, you will see something from both us and the Department of Justice in the not too distant future as we try to verify the individuals who are ultimately responsible for this. But it's not just going on here, it's across the country. And unfortunately, it's a business model that, some of these groups have developed, and there needs to be consequences for it.
Perfect. So, man, closing out, man, what do you got for the people? What's Ryan going to be doing? What's the biggest play in 2024 for Ryan Mears in the Marion County Prosecutor's Office?
Well, I think number one, we still have to be in a position to win our murder cases. As I talk to people in the community, that they want us to be on point with homicide cases, and they want us to be on point with child molesters. Those are probably the two biggest things that I hear, and so we have to do our job in the courtroom. I think the second part of that, though, is we all have to work together to figure out housing. We spend a lot of time with Horizon House and other groups trying to find housing for individuals, and we've got to make progress on the issue of housing. I would tell you that I meet a lot of people in our community who I think are ready to take the right step, the next step in a positive direction. And the challenge is I cannot get them into housing. And so one of the things that we're spending a lot of time on right now is how can we improve the housing opportunities for individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system. And that's something that we are spending a lot of time working on. And if we can do that, I'm a big believer that we're going to see those individuals leave the criminal justice system permanently. But if our answer to them is when they come to us for help is, hey, we got to turn you right back out to the street, or, hey, you got to fill out these 20 forms and we'll get back to you in 4 months. That's not a sustainable model that's going to benefit those individuals. And we need turnkey housing available to people. And I'm hopeful that all of us can come together to do that. If we don't, I think we're letting a lot of people down in our community.
Agreed. Well, thank you, Ryan, man. It's been awesome. I look forward. I'm definitely going to have you back, and have these conversations. I think what we've done today is shared a lot of information so our community can definitely have a greater understanding of what it is that you're doing, the challenges you face, and how we all move together with this thing forward in the city of Indianapolis. So, man, I thank you. I appreciate you, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Good to see everybody.
All right, Ryan, you have a great one. All right, man, that's been our prosecutor, Ryan Mears. Man, I absolutely love talking to Ryan because I think we just get a gambit of information that we can use. When you're outside and you're doing this work in our community, one of the things that we have to do, we have to connect with the people who can help make the difference. It's not just rhetoric, it's not just talk. We have to make connections, and if we don't make the connections, man, it's a hard road just to be loud. Let me tell you this. As I see so many of the road warriors on here, Toby Miller, Kim Boyd, Preston Adams, Anthony Hampton, Shauna Majors, all these people that I see, on my line right there. We all realize that the relationships that we have to have out in these offices, in these areas, that most of us, when we vote, we don't even keep up with these people. We have to have those relationships in order for us to do great work in the community. And I commend every person that's on here, that's out here doing this work, because one, it's a thankless job, but at the end of the day, these are the difference makers in this city. So thank you all. So with that being said, man, let's get to it. We got a couple minutes, and I'm going to chime in and give us our verse for the day. And that verse is coming from Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. It says, "Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens." Let me open that. "Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." And that just feeds into this so much, because wisdom, it's like, man, operating wisely is something that we have to do as a community. And when we operate wisely, man, so many things will change. I want us to understand something. Disagreements may happen in our community. A lot of people, I think one of the things that I realize about a lot of us is that we all agree that our fight is to make things better for our community. Sometimes we go about it in totally different ways, but I believe we all stand on the same thing. We have to be wise enough to make sure that great ideas are never condensed. They're never shunned. The light is never taken out. We need to know how to be in the same rooms, although we disagree. We need to always bring the cream of the crop to the table, never exile it. We always have to have that understanding. And when it's all said and done, just like in this text, it says, and those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. We have to lead our people to righteousness. When it's all said and done, man, I say this every day that I'm on here. I believe in God. And I believe that, the fear of God is the first step of wisdom. And for me, I understand that, I need him. And in order for us to lead people to righteousness, we need to guide them to him. And in this work, man, it's like, again, wisdom, helping people, guiding them to righteousness is everything that everyone on here that I know is trying to do. That's why we have this show called No Apologies, Please, because what we're doing needs no apology, because all we're doing is trying to make this place a better place. I appreciate the love, man. If you know anybody who wants to be on the No Apologies Please show, man, look, you see it on the bottom, Black on Black, LLC@gmail.com. We've got a No Apologies Cash App if you want to support the show. Man, we're here tomorrow. We're going to have Whitley Yates on the show. We're going to talk about what Wynn has going on. I'm looking forward to that. And then on Friday, we're going to have my brother Thomas X, who's going to sit down and talk to us about education and a lot of things that the Nation of Islam is doing in the city of Indianapolis. It's been your brother, Greg Meriweather, man. I appreciate the love. Continue to share the show. Yeah, I say this again. If you ask me how you can help me, you can help me by sharing the message. I appreciate it. Have a great day. Peace.